So record on computer. Here we go. Okay. And so basically, apologies for the issues with the computer last time. My computer was at max capacity, which I realized at the worst time. So I had to delete like 50 gigabytes of storage last week, which actually was mostly previous videos I had saved since like the COVID era, just from all the classes. And I'm like, I don't need this anymore. So we should be good to go on that. But I think I solved the issue. So um, great. Okay, and then just to refresh what I was saying here, under the YouTube playlist portion, this is the thing I created in week one. You should be able to access the first week's video, and then there's a part one and a part two of last week's lecture. Um, so feel free to take a look at those if you haven't already seen those. Week two, I had some issues, so I'm just gonna. It was a pretty short class. It was only like an hour for week two, so I think we can skip that one over. But assuming that there's no more storage issues or technical difficulties, which is a big assumption, I will keep uploading the videos here, and so you can access them. I know there's one or two students that cannot join live. So, yeah. All right. Where are we at? So, make sure nobody's in the lobby here. Oh, we do have somebody. Let's admit. Good morning. Whoever just joined there. All right. Down there maybe. Okay, let's get to the syllabus and see where we're at. All right. So this is week four. After today's, we're technically halfway through the term. So going pretty quickly, probably because there's only 8 meetings, but I think we've already got a lot accomplished, but we've got quite a bit more. So we are in week four, and we are going to cover supply, demand, market equilibrium, and some of the parts of week five, because essentially up to week now, I'm going to be covering the main parts of chapters 1 through 10. So if you have the textbook, again, I don't think it's like super intense reading. Go ahead and if you want to keep up, we're up to the end of chapter 10. So chapter 10, some chapters much more content than others, but I'm trying to kind of present the main items up to chapter 10, and we'll continue with maybe I think up to chapter 15 next week. I don't know if there's a whole lot in the next chapters going up to there's a whole section on game theory and like strategy that I want to focus on a lot. So depending on how far we get today, we may continue. I have a lot of content today, another homework assignment. And so we'll start it today. And if we finish it, great. If not, we'll continue next week. But so the first homework assignment was due last Saturday. I think I got all of them. I got some, the midnight deadline was very much taken as a as a literal interpretation by some. So I got some homeworks at midnight, which is fine. That's the reason why I have the deadline. But I will get those graded, and I'll have some solutions for you by next week. And yeah, okay. And I'll try to get. I need to have some grades for you all. I mean, everyone's coming to class, and I think doing all the homework. So I'm not a very difficult grader, just FYI, but you have to do the work to get a grade. So you'll probably be, you probably see I'm a pretty, pretty nice grader, but you have to do the work to get those nice grades. Okay, so we're gonna do chapters, the main highlights of chapters, let's see, 7, 8, 9, and 10 today. A lot of that is in the supply and demand chapter, and there's a couple, I think chapter 10 is just more of a, theoretical, the authors in textbook talk a lot about like business books. Give that chapter a read, but not a whole lot to talk about unless there's things that caught your eye. And then I have a homework that I put out, just posted this morning. That's going to be due in 2 weeks, in week 6. So keep an eye on that one. And really, that's where we're at now. So to summarize, keeping up to date, we'll be through chapter 10 today. Homework 1 was due last week. I'll get your grades for that and some grades overall by next week. And then just know that homework 2 is going to be due in 2 weeks. Okay. All right.
And you're gonna cover homework 2 today, right?
I'm gonna cover homework 2 today. Yeah. We're gonna start homework 2, and depending on how much time we have, we can get through all the main aspects, or might need to do some more next week. So up to you. Yes. And again, there's a lot of chapters. They're pretty short. I'm trying to cover all the content I think is most important and easy to kind of work together with. But if you see something in the textbook that I don't cover, I don't mention, that you want to talk about, let me know, and I'm happy to, add some new topics, assuming I have the knowledge on that topic. Okay. All right. So let me know if there's any questions on the syllabus. And what we'll do now is okay, review the syllabus. We got your new lecture slides, and the class meeting info is just the same link. There's a new homework assignment we'll get to, and then I mentioned that two of the 3 videos are posted for the lectures. So, all right. Any housekeeping questions before we jump into the new material? Yeah.
Broad question about
Sure.
the content. Looks like chapter 7, economies of scale. I hear that word overtime at work. Got a scale, so you go out and buy this company or that company to achieve scale. So I guess in this class, economics, that's like the optimal sort of output, right? But when you hear folks say that, is it more of we got to get scale? Are they actually referring to a specific, number, or are they just saying you've got to get scale as sort of a general, narrative?
Yeah, that's a good question. And this is chapter 9 or something like that.
I'm looking at 7 here.
Chapter 7. Okay.
Did I go back?
No, I just forgot which chapter was which. Yeah, so the question was on economies of scale and kind of what that means in context. And I think what the authors maybe highlight in that chapter is that, cut my copy a little bit, I make it a little strong, is that you kind of, the most important thing is figuring out where you are like in the industry and as a firm. So, hey, good morning. And so we can look at some of those concepts, economies of scale, but the main thing is like, you know where you are as like in the industry. If you have the capability to scale up like Amazon, you can probably do it, and that's recommended. But if you feel that like increasing production, or you forecast that increasing production would be too cost consuming, then you don't want to scale up. So I think the point of that chapter, which is more of a, I want to say like theoretical chapter than others, not a lot of like, this is what you should do exactly. It's realize the industry you're in, see if you can increase production to cut costs or increase profit, and do so. And so it's a really, I think it's a pretty good chapter, just trying to illustrate, like, recognize the industry you're in, recognize your cost structures and recognize your scale. And if you're able to scale up, great. If not, you don't want to do it just to do it kind of thing. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah, you did. I was listening to this interview with Elon Musk. He was talking about his Optimus robot. He says, you know, if we could do 1 million units a year, you know, that's the scale they need to get the price they want. That they think they can, you know, sell.
yeah,
That was kind of real world example, of, you know, what I
yeah.
was referring to.
Yeah, that's I think what maybe it might help to look at some of the graphs, but
Yeah.
you'll see that economies of scale is much like let me think of like a just a general example is if you start a business, it's pretty expensive to start it up, right? Like usually if you're not going to make it through a year or so, it's not worth it. And eventually you get to a point where like the next unit, the marginal unit is much less expensive because you got everything going. You've got you've got the supply chain set up and stuff like that. So increasing production should cut your average cost. But there is a point, depending on the industry, you know, Elon Musk excluded because he's not worried about scale. He's worried about ego. I don't know, or whatever he's worried about. Which I would like to talk about the satellite phones, but um, it, at some point, like if you're running a restaurant or something, you've got the scale. You know, you've got your 25, 30 employees and everything's going well. But let's say that you try to increase, but let's say you have a kitchen with 10 employees and you hire 25 more kitchen staff and throw them in the kitchen. They're probably not going to be very productive because there's not that much to do. They're going to be running into each other. Someone's probably going to get like, you know, there's a hazard. So if you're running a business that you can't, you kind of reach the point of, you know, if someone quits, you can hire somebody else, but you don't want to overdo it because you still got to pay those labor costs and your cost per unit's going to go, it's not going to be beneficial if you don't have enough work to go around. But if you're Amazon, there's sky's the limit, right? Any scaling up, it seems like is not right. Maybe they've tried a few things that didn't work. Um, I think their streaming services is a POS, but they keep doing it, and
Great.
yeah, I don't understand why they even want to be in the industry because it seems like they don't even try. But it kind of depends. I mean, I don't know. Can anyone think of something that like Amazon has attempted and backed out of? Not really, right? I mean, I guess they haven't done like a smartphone or something like
Well,
that.
Amazon did have that orbit where that you only millionaire to travel or stuff. I don't think how that's going, but it started, I guess, 2 years ago. It got a lot of publicity at first. You don't hear about that anymore, so that might be one.
Yeah, that's a good,
Hmm.
that kind of
Yeah,
got
they must have a few for sure.
have a few failures, but yeah, I guess it really depends on the industry you're in and if you can scale up and stuff like that. But
So I guess on the other side of economies of scale is that the diminishing return.
yeah, we'll cover that. That's a pretty easy concept.
Okay.
But yeah, the economies of scale is a more tricky theoretical one because you don't really know your economies of scale until you do more, do less. And sometimes it's too late. I know they had like the classic example in here was the Peloton during the COVID. Like,
Mm.
you know, our margins are like going through the roof and let's just double production. And everyone's like, what if COVID ends and people want to go outside and they're like, no, we've done the numbers. So they ran the numbers and the numbers were like based on continued growth. But, you know, I think what they failed to realize is that, not what I think, what they did fail to realize is that, you know, the most consumers already bought the product. Like you can't, like once you sell enough products, you're not going to get the marginal person is, you know, if you're not willing to spend, you know, thousands of dollars on that mirror thing or the Peloton, you're probably not going to do it next year. So all the big purchasers had already bought it, and then eventually, like people were like, I'm done, you know, working out in a room. I want to COVID's over at least for a while. I want to do other things. So knowing that um, they could have probably just kept production as is or catered to the people that it really, I'm sure there's people that still really like the Peloton and still use it, but the scale at which they were forecasting was unrealistic because, you know, they were pretty much like forcing us to do something that was
Yeah.
constrained by COVID. So
Right.
they didn't realize economies of scale, right?
We saw a dollar sign and got excited.
Yeah,
In some ways, I think that might be happening today with data center build out. And you got those big giant corporations,
yeah, I think you're right.
like their CapEx every year is
Yeah.
anywhere from 50 to 100 billion in new real estate. And it's good for all of us, right? They're spending, but you know, that could be a Peloton situation there, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a good uh market to caution because are we sure we need all that infrastructure? I don't know. We might, but um yeah. Same thing to do with like, you know, the industry I'm mainly in, which is energy, is we're forecasting these huge needs for more electrical capacity and growth in demand. Which is a good, you know, I think there's smart people and models that predict that, but we're not sure. Like
Mhm.
the forecast in electric vehicles is way lower than it was supposed to be. We were thinking we'd be at like 20% of car owners would have electric vehicles in California, and I think it's like less than 5%.
Really?
It's pretty low.
Okay.
In the, I mean, maybe it's closer to 10%, but in the US, it's less than 5. Like, it's just, well, what I guess the main thing is they fail to realize is just the cost difference. Like, it's just electric cars are just way more expensive.
Yep, they are.
And you know, the money you save on gas might be worth it in 10 years, but you still gotta pay an extra 20 grand to get that vehicle. Which is that's a big ask, right?
Yeah, yeah, I've listened to the
Yeah,
energy secretary give a speech this week about that. You know, energy production and the demand for it, but I guess from his perspective, the demand is coming from, you know, corporations, not particularly, you know, residential, because of those data centers.
right. Yeah. So anyway, that's a wait and see. We'll probably have more electrical vehicle owners, uh, you know, over time, but I don't know if we're gonna hit the 100% anytime soon.
Yeah.
Seems unlikely, but who knows? Um, yeah. I mean, I think the the soft forecast is like 2045, but that's there's a lot of, yeah, it seems a little unrealistic to, you know, unless you're just giving those cars away for, I mean, how many of you have electric cars? You, oh, two, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so
You're right about the premium.
the percentage of the, yeah, I mean, it's just,
And you know, I think the federal subsidies are ending on those
Yeah.
pretty soon too, so you'll probably see less of them out there in the market. Cause they're
Yeah.
not being subsidized anymore, or to the extent they are today.
yeah. I mean, I do like the idea of never having to go to the gas station and just, you know, I think the fear of like running out of mileage is less these days because, you know, I used to want to just want to have the capability to drive like 1,000 miles, but I just don't do that anymore. So that's less of a concern.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
It's more of just, you know, the premium on the car, having a couple limited, I mean, you know, it's just such, I mean, we have a Subaru Outback and I mean, it's pretty nice and it's a new one is only like 40 grand, which is pretty tough to,
Yeah, it's hard.
you know, and I know it doesn't get great gas mileage, but it's got like, everything else is great and it's,
Yeah, I think the luster of the electric car is wearing off. You know, it's nice not having to go to the gas station, but there's things about it they don't tell you when you buy it. Like you gotta replace your tires basically, you know, anywhere from 6 months to 9 months because the car's so heavy. There's a lot of things that, you know,
I didn't realize that.
yeah, I didn't either until recently.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of friends that own Teslas, and I think, I mean, there's always like pros and like everyone likes, they're slick, they're fast, but I think the majority is like, I don't know if it's worth the money I paid for it kind of thing. But anyways, I don't think they're going anywhere. So we'll still keep selling. But again, the point was that the economies of scale forecast isn't where we thought it would be 20 years, or not 20 years ago, even like in like 2018, the growth of electric vehicles, especially in California, was supposed to be much higher. Maybe we get there, and I think that's the plan. But if it's you can't really just force it if it's not.
Was that the electric car adoption by consumers? Was that really driving the demand or the forecasted demand for energy needs?
Well, a lot of the forecast was just state policy. Like there
Okay.
was a government mandate saying like we need to have 100% clean electric vehicles by a certain date. I think that date's been pushed. And then there's like you said, there were subsidies. So people were like, if I get a subsidy of 30 grand or whatever it is, why not? I mean, let's do it. So yeah, it's a lot of ins and outs of that one, but it's more of that. It seems like that state policy is not going anywhere. We might not hit the original target, but if we don't hit it by then, they'll say like, okay, this date we'll raise the target. But all right, let's open up the lecture slides for week 4, just today. Okay. Okay. There we go. Okay. They're like, I need to like email. So they're like the screen sharing thing like gets in the way of the item bar.
Yeah,
I don't know why. Okay, so I'm gonna cover just the highlights from chapters 7 to 10. We already precursored chapter 7, which is on economies of scale, and there's more to it than what I have in the lecture notes here. But we can continue that discussion on economies of scale. But the first thing is just learning about diminishing marginal returns. So the TV, push any button. This one's for. Okay, so if you can see this graph on the right, the marginal cost one. So we learned earlier about production functions. So here's your output on the x-axis. So as you produce more as a firm from zero, what's the per unit or marginal cost? And the concept of marginal returns is important because this curve isn't representative of every industry. Um, Again, for like Amazon, this increasing marginal cost portion is probably way over here, like output a billion or something. But the point is, like, if you're not producing anything, and you produce one or two or the initial units, it's going to be really expensive. So the first unit, the second unit, like your per unit cost is pretty high. And as you keep producing more, your costs go down. Like the marginal cost to produce the 100th unit in theory, is less costly than the marginal cost to produce the first. The first one's always the most expensive. And then you get to a point, like I had the restaurant example, where you've got, 10 employees in the kitchen, they're making food, they're doing all the prep and stuff like that. But if you all of a sudden say like, I want to increase production, without, buying more space, and just want to throw, 20 more people in the kitchen, they're just not gonna be productive because there's not enough work to do. They're gonna be bumping into each other, and they're gonna, so eventually for some business, the marginal cost to produce the next unit increases, and it keeps increasing. And once you get to the point where like, the 30th kitchen employee isn't very cost effective, guess what? Like the 34th and 35th, they're gonna be even worse. Not because they're not good workers, just because there's not enough work to go around. And now that the concept applies to really any business, it's just the point where this, decreasing returns flips to increasing returns. It depends on the industry, like if we're looking at a bigger corporation like Amazon or something like that. But for the most part, it's pretty, it's hard to dispute this. It's hard to figure out where this occurs. But as a business, you know that at some point, if you can get given what you're selling too, you want to increase production up to the point when your marginal returns are decreasing, and when it starts getting more costly, it's probably not, unless you're getting a huge reward for selling that product, each unit becomes more expensive. So that's the snapshot of decreasing the increasing returns. And every time you hear the concept of decreasing returns or increasing returns or decreasing returns to utility, that's a lot of times it's not used properly. Like you'll hear it used in different contexts, but that's the idea. So pretty self-explanatory, but you can take this graph and go a lot of ways with it. Right. Okay. And then the other cost on the left is the marginal cost, average cost graph. And so the blue one's the same. That's your marginal cost. And then the average cost is the average cost per unit. So you know right away that initially at small amounts of production, it's super costly. As you keep producing more at a decreasing rate, your average cost goes down. And then here's what they call the MES, or the minimum efficient scale. And that's the point where your marginal cost and average costs are equal. And that's in theory where you'd like to, hover around. I know that these graphs are, you can't just, run a business and draw this graph and be like, here's what I want to do easy. It's difficult to know where this point is, but you see the idea is that if your marginal costs are decreasing, depending on your revenue, it's best to keep producing. And then at some point when your average cost is skyrocketing and your per unit cost is going up, then it's not recommended to increase production unless you're really getting compensated for that revenue. Okay, so the textbook definition, the law of diminishing marginal returns states that as you increase output, your marginal productivity, the extra output associated with each unit of production eventually declines, like you can see here. So here we go, it's declining, and then at some point it's increasing. So this portion over here is decreasing, and this portion over here is increasing. And all that means is the next unit either is less costly than the previous one, or the next unit now is more costly than the previous one. So pretty simple concept, harder to determine in practice, but that's the idea. So I think this was also the scale chapter, but I didn't have a lot of slides for this chapter because it was mostly just this concept, the economies of scale. And then I wanted to spend more time on the supply and demand analysis, but any any additional questions on economies of scale or returns?
What's diminishing marginal return really telling you? Like, it sounds like it's more of a theory, because if marginal revenue equal marginal cost, don't you continue to produce? In other words, even if it's diminishing, there's a situation in which you should still continue producing. As
Yeah.
long as you're making revenue.
That's correct. Yeah, that's a good point. But it's more, I think the reason why it's important is because knowing the cost aspect is much easier to put on the books than than controlling the prices and revenue thing. And so usually when you're, running the books, it's much easier for a business to know how much everything costs than to know how much revenue they're gonna get and what the price is gonna be, and what the price is gonna be, and if someone's gonna buy it, right? It's I think the point here is like this is essentially a supply curve, right? This is a supply curve, and this transitions into a supply curve once we talk about it. But it's as a business, I would think it would be much easier to know your supply curve aspect than your demand curve, right? And so that's why it's important, because if someone just said like here's the quantity you should produce where MR equals MC, you do it, but it's difficult to know that aspect. So I think just knowing the cost aspect is much easier to figure out than the other, right? Because you're in control of it. But good point. Like if you know the best thing is just produce the next unit until it's not worth it, then that's kind of the idea. But it's hard to know that. Okay. So the next chapter is chapter. So that was the highlights of 7. The next chapter is chapter 8, I believe, which is the supply and demand market equilibrium stuff, which we'll spend a lot of time on, and then a little bit of time on chapter 9 and 10. Less on chapter 10 because it's not really a lot besides like business concepts or. Okay. What do you guys think of the textbook? Like it, or yeah, they I think they do a good job on some things. They're pretty efficient. A lot of times it'll tangent a bit. I'm like, why are they talking about this right now? And sometimes they're just, I don't know if I like when they're like, take a minute to figure it out, like, kind of thing. It's a little maybe narcissistic is the wrong word, but just a little. But they do a good job of getting the points. But sometimes the like the next page is like, where did that kind of thing come from? There was a whole aspect of, I think, like bond yield and bond returns in the middle of I'm like that. I didn't even know we were doing that right now, kind of thing. So
I think it's pretty succinct. I like that. Sometimes just showing the formulas to solve some of these problems, it's not easy to find them.
Yeah, but they do a good job of putting a lot of like real world examples, I think.
Yeah.
Like they'll explain it with something that actually happened, which is good. So I do think they do a pretty good job of that. Okay, so we learned about demand last time. Here's the prices on the y-axis and quantities on the vertical. Even though we're looking at the effective price on demand. I believe we discussed this last time. I'm not gonna. I tried to do some Excel examples last time, which were somewhat effective, but it because of the like constraints of Excel, and the constraints of not having like a whiteboard, this is probably just as efficient, but essentially when demand goes up, it shifts out to the right, and you see that each prevailing price, the demand is now higher than it was before. So we learned about that last time, and lots of things that can lead to that, but just a refresher there. Increase in demand is like the shift from the blue line to the red line. Okay, we didn't talk about supply yet, but it's a pretty straightforward concept that I'm sure you've heard about before. Instead of a downward sloping curve, it's an upward sloping curve, because every time the price goes up, the supplier would like to supply more because they're getting a higher return. And this ties into that concept of marginal cost. So think of these, they're not the same exact thing, the marginal cost curve and the supply curve, but they're related. So it's unlikely the supply curve is just going to be this like straight line going up. It's more likely going to be something like actually like this, where like initially your costs are higher. So what I mean is it's more of like the slope increases more than just a straight line. So as you get to higher prices, the increase in quantity wouldn't be as much because you don't have that capability. So the concept is pretty clear. Like price goes up, you want to supply more, but it's not a direct linear relationship where like if the price goes up by $2, you supply two more kind of thing. As you get to really high prices, you'd like to supply more, but you're probably not going to because no one's going to buy it, I think. But the concept is pretty simple. Okay, now do we have? Yeah, we have. What? I don't like how it's messed up my. You know what? Just because of that, I'm gonna give me up on this. Get this. There we go. Oh, this is the wrong one. Sorry. This one. Okay. There we go. We did that. We did that. See, look, that looks much better. Yeah. Okay, market equilibrium. So here's our demand curve. Here's our supply curve. In theory, there's some price and quantity in which supply is equal to demand, meaning that if the price were lower, there wouldn't be as many suppliers that would supply it. There would be some. If the price were higher, the demand would exceed, the supply would exceed demand, and there wouldn't be enough consumers to purchase it. So it's, this is just, it's more of a gravity kind of thing. And this is where, in theory, the market price should be, because if it was higher, the offset of supply and demand wouldn't be the same, and vice versa. Over here, demand exceeds supply, but firms aren't willing to supply enough at that low price. And over here, supply exceeds demand, and there aren't enough consumers to buy at that higher price. So in a real market, it's unlikely that this is a perfect illustration of it, but the concept is pretty solid. Right? Okay, so knowing the concept, what happens if something changes? So if we start at this blue demand curve and this green supply curve, and there's some kind of increase in demand, we know that demand shifts to the right. And first, both curves can shift and stuff can change, but in this concept, the only thing we're showing is an increase in demand. So demand goes to the right. All right. And so if demand goes to the right, assuming nothing else changes, that would represent the fact that on average, the consumers of this good or service are willing to pay to buy more at the same price. And so if there's more demand, what happens is in theory, the demand curves goes to the right, and that would lead to a situation, in the short run where the on a higher point of the supply curve, there'd be more demanded, more supplied, and the price would be a little bit higher because now not every consumer, but on average, more consumers are willing to pay higher prices. So we went from like a price of $7.50 in a quantity of 5 to a price of 10 in a quantity of like 7.5%. So it should be I mean, it should make sense that if demand goes up and nothing else changes, you'll likely get to a situation where there's a higher price in the market and more people buying it because there's more people willing to buy it. Yes.
So if it shifts to the net, what does that mean? If the red is, on the left side?
Yeah, that's a good, we can, so let's assume that the red one is the original and the blue is the decrease, right? Demand goes down. So it's just the opposite. If at the same prices, the market demand is lower, then you're gonna see a leftward shift. And so the new market price and quantity would be a bit lower than the previous because there's less consumers willing to buy. And think of it like this. So if we go this way along the supply curve, the suppliers that were supplying at these prices aren't willing to supply at this lower price, but all these other suppliers are. So the suppliers on the margin that couldn't supply it, that can only supply at like $10, $9, $8, they're not going to supply at $7, but there's still a big portion that would. So it'd be the opposite. The market quantity would be lower and the market price would be lower.
Is there ever a situation where demand increases, the producer lowers price?
Yeah, certainly. That would also, I mean, that would represent a change in supply as well. So if demand increases and supply also increases, that would lower the price, right?
Okay.
So that would be a scenario where like, yeah, if we're at the red curve and then this blue curve shifts out, you've just forecasted that in your head that now the market quantity is higher, but the price is lower. So yes, if there were multiple like competitors in this industry, they might want to meet, and can you think of an example where that's happened? Probably, right? Like, maybe like not a direct, unit interpretation, but just the demand and supply of like, I don't want to call them MP3s, but like digital music. So originally when we started transitioning from CDs and whatnot to digital music, there was either like you buy this like MP3 player that plays like 20 songs, which was rather expensive. And there was a little while of time you could buy it on iTunes. And that led to the fact that like all these people had these items to share and didn't want to pay the market price that led to Napster and stuff like that. But now it's pretty cheap to listen to a song, right? You just need Spotify. It's like $15 a month. You can listen to whatever you want. Before Spotify, and before the MP3 market, you had to buy a CD, which was like $15. You could only listen to those, 10 songs. So the ability to stream music and listen to music, I think has both, and I would think there would be a lot more people listening to music and the cost is quite a bit cheaper, right? Just because the market's changed so much. So the demand for music has definitely increased. And the cost of listening to music, this probably isn't good for there's lots of pushback from the artists that they're not getting compensated fully, which isn't great for them. But for the consumer, it's pretty cheap to listen to music unless you want to, you know. But I think the way like Spotify works, I think the really big artists make a ton of money, and I think the indie artists are the ones that are just trying to make it get compensated, but it's a tough game unless you get to like the Taylor Swift level where it doesn't really matter what you know when you when you get to the point when you can just re-record your own records because you don't like the production company, then you don't really have to worry about
But it's interesting too, I mean, those indie artists, they get a much broader reach.
yeah, you're right.
He used to work out with at the gym. His album shows up on Spotify. I
Yeah,
didn't even know he made one. That's pretty neat.
yeah,
And the barrier to entry as a listener is minimal. You don't have to buy an MP3 player. Just put it on any device you have. That's,
yeah. I think that's what some of the artists are missing is that if you're just making songs for Spotify, might not be a good business, but if you're really getting advertising for shows and
Yeah.
I mean a lot of people buy the vinyl market's back up, so if you really like something on Spotify, there's people who would pay $40 for the record. So and the cost of I'm almost positive the cost of live music has really gone up. So that's where you can make a ton of money as an artist is um yeah, so it's kind of been the opposite where concerts were always a bit of a spend, but now it seems like it's quite a bit higher. But just listening to a song is pretty cheap, and there's a lot of people that can do it.
my daughter's 11, she's buying records.
You buy records already.
Doesn't have a record player, but got the records.
Uh,
That market is, for some reason, opening up again.
yeah, it's no, I have a lot of friends
Oh, yeah?
that have a new record collection or have an expanded record collection. Um, yeah, it's not. I don't know that it's something I would invest a ton of money into, but I can see it. I think it's kind of fun. If you like music and it's
I guess it's more about collecting the history than
Mhm.
the actual album.
yeah, I mean to be fair, it does sound a lot better than if you listen to something with like if you listen to like a Beatles song on MP3 or on a record, you'll hear a few things. You're like, wait a minute, that wasn't because the MP3 quality is like 1% of
Yeah.
what the actual quality is. But anyways, so I can see it, but yeah. Who knows? That I'm not sure if that market's gonna keep growing or it's gonna halt, but it's an interesting one because it's one of there's a few like vintage things that have taken off like that, but it's not like you see that's not happening in the movie market or like there's not a lot of people buying like um cameras, right? That's all it's one of the few things that's like the more vintage the better. Okay. Oh God, what was this? So this example in your textbook was for the demand and supply in home. Oh, this is the Peloton example. So this is um, what happened in Peloton with supply and demand analysis. So everything in there. Okay, so we started at a supply and demand of S1 and D1, which is point A at equilibrium. And then the during COVID, especially the demand for home fitness, like the mirror thing and the Peloton increased a ton because you couldn't go to gyms, you couldn't go on vacations, you go on the street and you got to wear a mask. So the demand for Pelotons really increased to D2. And then what the suppliers did of Pelotons is, jack up supply because they forecasted that this increased growth would continue. And so the new equilibrium was point B, I guess, S2. So eventually there was a lot more Pelotons and a lot more people buying it during COVID. But then what happened is demand decreased a ton because there wasn't any more buyers, and people either, kept their Pelotons or sold them, but didn't buy a lot more because that market had lost its its physique after COVID. And then so demand went back down to D1. And that's where we're kind of at now, is that we're at a point of C, because there's still, some consumers of Pelotons, and I'm sure it's still a pretty good product, but the forecast was not hit. And I think in the textbook, it talks about how the stock price went down like $100 or something per share. So this is an example of supply and demand both increasing, but supply not realizing that this demand increase was a short-term increase, and now we're at point C. So it's kind of full circle for the industry, where they probably would have been fine if they just kept production at somewhere around point A and C, and not assuming that the COVID trend would continue forever.
So, question, Professor.
Yeah, please.
Do you think they invested in the wrong thing? Like, so they invested more in equipment instead of the programs that went on to the screen that was on the Peloton?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it's a two-part answer. So I think they overestimated, or I don't think they did overestimate the demand for Pelotons. And so just the physical quantity of people that would keep buying and buying Pelotons wasn't what they thought, especially after COVID. But you're right. Maybe you should have been maybe you should have been a business advisor for Peloton, but their money might have better been spent on improving the actual products for the consumers they already had, getting syncing it up with your phone, making the video quality better. So we're having yeah, I think what you might be getting at is just having more and more updates and things to buy for the original consumers would have been a lot better investment, because I think there's still a lot of consumers that would be using Peloton, but just scaling up the actual product was way too high. So yeah, I think you're right.
All right. And yeah, I that a meme highlighted that for me because somebody was like, "Why would I buy a Peloton when I can buy a regular bike and use my phone and YouTube?" So
Yeah,
that was funny.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I can still see the advantage if it's maybe less so in LA because the weather's so nice, but uh, you don't. I mean, a lot of people don't want to bike at night if they want to work out at that time, or if it's raining, or if it's 2 weeks ago it was like 100 degrees, so I'd rather use a Peloton than than bike in that weather. So I see the advantage, but yeah, I think they they missed the idea that some people after COVID would just rather bike, um, and did, right? Yeah.
Right.
So does anybody here have a Peloton? I don't want
No,
no? Okay.
bike.
Just yeah. We have, all right. Next. Oops. What is this? Okay, so this is a different scenario. So what we're doing is trying to illustrate a bunch of scenarios in uh with supply and demand analysis, but it depends. So what we know is that we start with some initial equilibrium. Demand can change, supply can change. One can be a short-term change, one cannot be. Or in this case, we're just using the example of increased supply with the original demand curve to illustrate the mobile phone industry. So we're at point P0 and Q0. And then, so this is like iPhones. So whenever iPhones took off in like 2008, that sound right? Something like that?
Yeah.
What do you-
I think it was 2007.
2007? Okay, so let's say 2007. Um, the, the price of an iPhone was, I mean, let me rephrase before I go down the wrong road. So the price of an iPhone has definitely increased, but the price of an iPhone relative to other phones has gone down very much. So at the time the iPhone came out, I think it was like, I don't know, $200. But at the time, you can go get a Verizon plan and they give you a phone. Like when you first got a phone plan, the phones didn't cost anything. They're just like, we just want your money for the subscription. Go pick any phone you want. Whatever, we don't care. So paying $200 for something that was free was quite a bit. But then once Apple and uh, BlackBerry and whatever the other can't remember all the ones along the ways. There's like a Galaxy. I think the Pixel is still around, but anyways. So once we realized that the demand for smartphones was increasing, the supply kept increasing and increasing and increasing. All right, and so what they're illustrating is a point now where, I mean, almost everyone has a cell phone. If you know someone that doesn't have a cell phone, it's probably like your great grandma or something, or just someone that's, uh, we probably know a few people who held out a few years too late, just like with the.
Let's be undergrads.
Yeah. Undergrads using their smartphone. This is the. Uh, and now we're at somewhere like Q1 where the supply of smartphones is way higher. And we just went down the demand curve. Now it's tough to make this point because like a new smartphone is still like $1,000, but relative to other things, I think the concept is that it's cheaper, um, even though it's much more like monetarily wise than it was in 2007. But adjusted for inflation, there's the idea is that and you can buy used ones now. You can you can buy like uh, a a different thing, iPhone different than an iPhone that's cheaper, but there's way more cell phones. There's way more demand, and the market price relative to what it was before has gone down. Just to go away. There we go. Okay. So summary of main points from chapter 8. So we've learned two changes in demand. So the first is if price changes, just the price goes up or down. The quantity demanded increases or decreases, it goes up or down the demand curve. And if something other than price, like income changes, there's a shift, assuming that it affects demand. So if something changes that doesn't affect demand, we don't, like if we're looking at the demand for iPhones and it's, you it's winter or like it's a season, it's probably not gonna, right? Some things don't, like seasons or weather don't affect iPhones. They would affect things like, ice cream sales. Okay, and then market equilibrium is the price at which quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. And we know that if price is above the equilibrium price, there's too many sellers forcing price down and vice versa, or in theory, and unless something changes. So those are the main points and concepts from chapter 8. We're going to do a lot of examples and practice exercises to enforce it. And I did like a lot of the multiple choice questions for this chapter, which we'll take a look at. So what do we got here for time? Okay. So we can, what time do you all want to take a break? I can't remember what we did last time, like 10? 10 to. Yeah, all right, let's give it a, well, we do some examples, we'll take a break at like 10 and then continue. So let's look at some examples from the textbook. These ones, you don't have to turn in. I just liked a lot of the multiple choice ones, so let's take a look at them and see if we can kind of reinforce the concepts. And then we'll move on to different types of industries, possibly after the break. So, chapter 8. Chapter 8. Where's my? Okay. Another example of, so it seems like chapter 11, I haven't read through it yet, but it does seem like a bit of a transition from the rest of the textbook. So I'll take a look at it and see what we want to cover in chapter 11, but it it does seem like quite a bit different than what we've been covering. This isn't really a foreign exchange trade class, but take a look at chapter 11. We'll talk about bubbles in the domestic context, but I don't want to transition too far into like foreign exchange and trade and tariffs because then we'll get sidetracked. But if there's something particular you want to focus on in the context of the class in chapter 11, let me know. But I'll try to hit the bubbles at least, but not gonna deep dive into tariffs because it'll be a bit of a tangent, unless you all want to.
I think it's pretty dang interesting.
Okay, all right, I'll take.
I mean, don't do it just for me.
Yeah, no, I'll see what they cover in the chapter. And see how it relates to the stuff we've been talking about. But I do think it's a little bit of a, my point is like chapter 11 could be a whole new class. Which would be a good one, but we'll see how much we want to, or we can spend a whole day on it, whatever, we'll see. Okay, well, I got a tangent, let's go to. Okay, all right, so let's just think through some of the multiple choice questions, and then it should, build our understanding of the concepts. So question number 1, it's a little bit bigger. There's viewing. Is changes in prices of a good are A, moving along the demand curve, moving along the supply curve, no movement along either curve, or both A and B? What's
It's A according to your lecture notes. But.
Well, it's definitely A, but it's also B, right? All right, so yeah, it's if the price changes, then you go up or down one of the curves, but nothing shifts. So I think it would be both A and B. They're really emphasizing the home exercise equipment fail. I mean, if I was Peloton, I might send some emails to these. So imagine that the market for home exercise equipment experiences an increase in supply and decrease in demand. When did that happen? Which of the following results is expected to occur? So we just saw this graphically, but increase in supply, decrease in demand. So which of the following is expected to occur? So both the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity could rise or fall. That's the equilibrium price would rise and the equilibrium quantity could rise or fall. Equilibrium price would fall and the equilibrium quantity could rise or fall. The equilibrium price would fall and the equilibrium quantity would fall. So I think it's best to look at this graph because it's a bit confusing in words. This is what we're looking at. So if we went from A, or no, if we went from A to B to C, what do we know for sure? Equilibrium quantity, depending on the, the shift, it probably could go below the original amount. But for sure the price went down, right? So what we know for sure is that the equilibrium price would fall. I'm sure about that. And the equilibrium quantity could rise or fall. That's the one that most represents what we saw. Do we agree?
The price would definitely fall,
Yeah.
quantity could rise.
The reason why, like, because you don't know if the increase in supply is larger than the decrease in demand. So we're going this way. We don't know which one's bigger. Like if the demand, the supply increase is higher, right? Then the quantity would go up. If the demand decrease is lower in magnitude, then it would go down. So they don't tell us the magnitudes,
Okay.
but we know for sure that, if supply goes up and demand goes down, there has to be a lower price. Otherwise,
Yeah, that's for sure.
okay. When a demand for a product falls, which of the following events would you not necessarily expect to occur? A decrease in the quantity of the product supplied, that's likely. A decrease in price, a decrease in the supply of the product, a leftward shift in demand. So we know that this is occurring. This is probably occurring. I don't know what the difference. So a decrease in the supply of the product, that's likely. A decrease in the quantity of the product. What the difference?
Yeah, you can see pretty similar.
A decrease in the quantity of the product supplied. A decrease in the supply of the product. A decrease in the price. I think all these things occur because all we have to do is look at this graph here. So let's say we're going back this way. All right. So quantity goes down, price goes down, supply shifts left. Maybe this was an error. A decrease in the quantity of the product supplied. I think they're trying to say one of these is a decrease in the supply curve. So this, now that I'm thinking of it, this means a decrease in the supply of the product. That means a shift in the supply curve, which is possible, but not necessarily expected to. Right, so we know the price is going down. Okay, so we go from this point to this point, right? Price is going down, demand's going down, market quantity is going down. Now it's possible that the supplier could be like, well, this market sucks, I'm gonna decrease my supply, but we don't know that for sure. So the one thing we don't necessarily expect to occur, although it could, is a decrease in the supply of the product. Right?
So there could be a decrease in the product and there could not be.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. suppose a recent and widely circulated medical article has reported new benefits of, they're really going for the cycling. And this, like,
Yeah, this person probably bought it.
I think my guess is like these authors are like avid bikers and like hate Peloton or something. Because I've never seen like this point hit so hard for. So suppose a recent and widely circulated medical article has reported new benefits of cycling for exercise. I don't think that's pretty, you don't need an article to tell you that. So simultaneously, the price of the parts needed to make bikes falls. If the change in supply is greater than the change in demand, the price will blank and the quantity will blank. Okay, so if the change, so if the, let's see. Okay, so first of all, let's just look at these one by one. So based on this description, is supply going to increase or decrease? Is the supply curve going to increase? It's kind of a tricky one.
Because you're assuming demand's gonna go up because the article. is
Correct,
suggesting
yeah.
do it, but then the price of. The parts need to make them, so the bikes would be more expensive.
Right,
Um. Supply is greater.
so just the first part, if the parts are more expensive, then it costs the suppliers more to make it. So there's gonna be a little bit of a leftward shift in demand, right? For the original price and quantity, they gotta get a little more to be compensated. So supply would decrease, shift to the left, right?
Yeah.
Because it got more costly, but we know demand would also increase. Okay, so maybe I can show it with this double scenario. Because we have all of them. So we would go, if supply decreases, goes this way, and demand goes this way. Okay. Let's see. So, right. Yes. We're trying to get to start to a point where, so, no, there. Yeah, here we go. So we're basically going from C to A. So here's the original. No. Demand increases and supply decreases. We're here, right? Demand increases because of the article. Everybody wants to get a bike, and then supply decreases because it's more costly. So if we go from C to this point, we know for a fact that if there's more buyers and supply goes down, the price is going up, right?
Yeah.
People are going to pay more. The suppliers need to be compensated more. So the price is going up. That's all we know for sure, I think.
Price will rise.
Oh, but they said if this change in supply is greater than the change in demand, we know the price will rise. I'm positive of that. And the quantity will. So is this scenario that? No. Okay, so it's hard to see it here, but imagine a scenario where this shift is bigger. And so let's go to like this point, right? Because the supply shift is bigger than the demand shift. And we would get a situation where the price went up and the market quantity went down. So I'm pretty sure it would be rise and fall. Now, a bit of a thought exercise, but it's important to be able to visualize, I think. So
Yeah, that
do we
is
see it?
crazy to run better.
Yeah. Yeah. If I had a, I don't know, draw it for you real quick, but. Oh, okay, one second. Just to illustrate the point, and is Okay, so here's the original. Here's the original quantity. And here's the original price. Okay. And then we know that demand increases because of the article, right? Okay. And then we know supply decreases because it's now more costly to make the bikes. But they said that the supply shift was bigger. So that means that the supply shift has to be bigger than this distance. So let's just over exaggerate and say it's here. Okay, so then this new point, let's call it B.
Price comes up on anybody now.
And I think I should have showed a scenario where we just described, right? Yeah. Price rises, quantity falls. Yeah, there's the. It's easier to do it if you get rid of all the other scenarios. Okay. Okay. This one we'll skip because it's just drawing a supply and demand curve and finding the equilibrium, which we'll do with some other exercises. You're welcome to try it, but it's just more of graphing a line. Okay. Same with this one, although I would want to illustrate how the price floor affects the supply and demand market, although we haven't really hit that yet. I'm gonna put I'll put a note. There's the chat. So topics to possibly discuss later. Price floors, price ceilings. Okay. So if we have time, or if I forget, remind me and I can illustrate those, but I don't want to do it yet because it's a bit of it takes a bit of time to explain, but it's a good kind of argument against some of these things. Where are we? Okay. Number 7. Okay, this is a more theoretical one. We can do this one real quick. Get away. Okay, say the average price of a new home in Halen City is $260,000. The local government had just passed new licensing requirements for housing contractors. So what's that gonna mean before we continue? The cost.
To obtain that license.
The cost to get the license is gonna go up, right? Yeah. So based on possible shifts in demand or supply, and assuming the licensing change doesn't affect the quality, which of the following is a reasonable prediction for the average price of a new home in the future? So if it's going to be more costly, I'm trying to think if this would affect licensing requirement for home contractors. So that only affects the suppliers, right? Or is this also going to affect?
I'm assuming, well, I'm making a leap here, but the contractors are gonna pass that on.
Yeah.
Yep.
for the house.
Yeah, that's probably right. So, right, that seems like the case is it's gonna be more costly for the contractors or sellers, and they're going to exactly pass that on. So if we're starting at 260, unlikely the price is going down. So there's only one scenario, right, where we don't know for sure, but if it's more costly for the homes to be supplied, they're not going to lower the price. They're not going to keep it the same. So it's likely that the costs will go up, although this is a very cheap.
Yeah, I'll buy three.
Yes, exactly. So wherever New Halen City is, yeah. Yeah, so the point is, you don't have to do the graph, but you know, exactly as we talked about, if the cost to supply the houses goes up, in theory, there's gonna be a little bit less supply, although it's tough to make that argument in this case, because most houses on the market are occupied. But it probably makes more sense if you think about um, like those units that have like multiple, the one like down the street that has all the condos and houses like together. Now, those are, you can rent, you can buy. So I'm sure they have positions where not everything is occupied. Although for the most part, this housing market scenario would probably just increase the price, right? Okay, getting the idea. Okay, so question number 8. Suppose a new employer is also relocating to Halen City and will be attracting many new people who will want to buy new houses. Assume that the change in licensing requirements mentioned in question 7 occurs at the same time. So what do you think will happen to the equilibrium quantity of new homes bought and sold in Halen City? So we know that we don't know actually, right? Because we know that the prices for suppliers is going up, so in theory that would decrease supply. And we know that there's more people moving there, so that would increase demand. So if I look back to this guy again, see if I can. All right, so we have all the scenarios I can go back and forth. So we want to show a increase in demand and a decrease in supply, which is the same scenario we just determined, but what we're trying to think through is, are there more buyers than the offset in increased cost for suppliers? We don't know that. So if there's a ton of new buyers, if everyone moves to this town, then the quantity would go up. But if this licensing requirement is super high, you might see all these increased costs go this way for the supply decrease, and quantity might go down. Although not a very good example in housing, but the point is we don't know if this demand increase or this supply decrease is bigger. And so the effect on quantity would be unknown, but what do we know for sure is happening to the price?
Price is gonna go.
Price is going up. There's no question, right? It's more costly to supply the houses. There's more homeowners that want it. That price is going up. So what do we know for sure about the equilibrium quantity? It will decrease, it will decrease, it will increase. I think it's this one because we don't know we don't know the comparison between the new home buyers and how costly that licensing requirement is. If the licensing requirement is like, $50,000, there could be some houses taken off the market in this context.
So if there's a demand, is there automatically an increase in price? Or if the demand goes up, the price automatically follows suit and goes up? That's not necessarily,
Unless supply also increases, right?
which is gonna happen, right?
Well, not in this case, because here there's there's a finite supply of houses, so they got more costly to supply. So the supply curve goes down, right? And then there's more consumers. But if we went to like, if we start at A and you're looking at it, increase in demand and an increase in supply, then the price might go, if there were way more, let's say that this was tough to do with the housing market, but let's say that we're at point A at some price, like 250,000 and this much quantity. And there's a huge demand for it. But let's say that the homeowners and contractors are like, oh, everyone's moving here, let's build like 1 million houses. And if they supply so much that it exceeds the demand increase, then it would push the price down, right? So an increase in demand isn't necessarily going to lead to a decrease in price. Probably is, I mean, increase in price, but it depends on what the suppliers do to react to that. Okay. All right, a few more, then we'll take a break here. The price of peanuts increases. At the same time, we see the price of jelly, which is often consumed with peanut butter, rise.
To clarify that one.
Yeah. How does this change affect the market for peanut butter? So this is so what did we call these things last time? What was
Compliments.
Compliments, exactly. All right. So let's think about this again. So the price of peanuts increases. The price of jelly also increases. How does this change affect the market for peanut butter? So the demand curve, because the price of jelly has gone up and you have to buy that with peanut butter, the demand curve is going to have to go to the left because that complement got more expensive. So I know it's one of these first ones. Now, the
Supply curve going to the left means there's an increased supply, right?
the supply for going to the left means there's a decrease in supply, but increase in but that would be correct because we're looking at the market for peanut butter. So the price of peanuts increases. So now it's more costly to supply those peanut butters. And the price of jelly increased. So now the demand for that complement also, so basically both things decrease, right? There's less consumers because they now have to buy more expensive jam or peanut jelly. And then it's now more costly to supply peanut butter. So the market quantity of peanut butter would decrease. But we don't know what happened to price because again, it depends on how expensive if the price of peanuts doubles, that's a different thing. And if the price of jelly, like, just goes up at 10 cents, we need to know the magnitudes. But we know for sure that if this is the case, there's going to be less peanut butter on the market, right? Because it's more costly to produce it. And the consumers have to pay more for this jelly. That's the idea. So in this same scenario, would they both decrease? Okay, so if supply decreases, demand decreases. So look, if demand decreases to here, the price would go up. But if demand decreases to here, the price would go down. But either way, this is going down, right? There's less suppliers, there's less buyers. All right. One more thought question, then we'll take a quick break here. So we'll, yeah, good time. So holding other factors constant, an increase in the tax for producing coffee causes. So this is a increase in the cost to supply coffee, right? So we know the supply curve will shift to the left. So it's one of these two. Would it cause the price of coffee to rise? Or cause the price of coffee to fall? So, so we do know the answer because it says holding other factors constant, so that means demand doesn't change. So is it this one? Or is it this one? Yeah. Right, because the only thing that happens is the supply curve shifts. Right, and if the supply curve shifts, it gets more costly to supply coffee. We just shift the curve up here and go up the demand curve, and now the price goes up, right? Supplier, if the behavior of demand doesn't change, people still want coffee. All that's gonna happen is some of the buyers would not buy it at this price. But it would just go up the demand curve and represent this group of consumers who would buy it at that price. And the suppliers have to decrease supply of it because it got more costly. Okay? So it's this one. Okay, let's take a break. It's 10:09 right now. Come back here like 10:20. Work? Okay. All right, so I'll put that in the chat, but we'll take a quick break until 10:20. Suppose I can pause the recording. Resume recording. Okay. All right, so I had a quick question on the final. So let me look at the syllabus real quick. Okay, so last week is October 11th. Um, yeah. Oh, here's that. I'm just trying to look at the calendar. October 11th. All right.
That's when it's due.
That's when it's, no, that's when that's our last day, right? So that's when I'll distribute it. And we can talk about it. And then how many days do you need to do it is what you're asking. Oh, maybe it's due like midnight on Sunday or something. That work? Or what? Yeah. Is that
Some classes give you a week.
a week?
I mean, it depends how many questions
Yeah.
you're gonna have too, so.
Yeah, I don't know if I wanna do it a week, cause then I gotta get the grades in and I think by the next weekend. Um. I mean, you would,
Because on the 11th, you're gonna have lecture, or are you just gonna go over the exam?
my plan was just to go over the exam and highlight key things and do some practice questions
Okay.
on the 11th. So I think it'll just be like how long did the first homework take? 2 days? Oh, okay,
On the first homework, you mean?
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I took my time, I would do like a question at a time, a day maybe, if I had time.
okay. Yeah, I can give you more time to do it.
But do you have an idea of how many questions are there gonna be?
No, I think it'll just be like another homework assignment,
Just let me know.
but with like a little bit from everything. Yeah, I don't think it'll be any longer than a homework assignment. So, when's your other final due? I guess
No, well, it's about the same day, yeah,
it's
on the 11th.
it's due on the 11th.
Yeah, because, my next class is, also 8 weeks, so. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Because I assume your next class starts on the 25th. I mean,
Right,
right?
the second, class, yeah.
Yeah. And I think grades are due like the 18th or 19th. I think the 8th. And I gotta. So, I suppose I could try to prepare it earlier if that's easier and have it due on the 11th.
Yeah. Sure.
Is that better? Then what are we gonna do on our last day? Um, I guess I could do another lecture and just have it not be on the final.
Well, can we turn it in on the 18th, before you turn in the grade, or?
Well, I don't know if I have enough time to grade it.
Uh,
That's the problem. Like, if you turn it in, I still have to grade.
yeah,
Yeah. Um, well, anyway, I'm glad you brought that up, so I can, just so I know. Maybe maybe I distribute it on the 4th, and it's due on the 11th.
mhm,
Is that better?
yeah.
Okay. Any, any objections to that for the rest of you on the Zoom? So the question was, when is the final due? And I was gonna, distribute it on our last day on the 11th. And I hadn't decided the due date, but now that I'm realizing that if you need like a week, the turnaround time to grade it would be very constraining if I have to get the grades on the 18th and they're due on the 18th. So possibly I can give you the final on October 4th, and it's due on the 11th. Would that work?
Yeah, that worked for me.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. Let me just think of that, or let me just think of this over again. Uh, yeah, I think that's fine. Because our last meeting, the 8th, or sorry, the 11th, can be more of a like um open topic day. And I wasn't gonna put these two items on the calendar or the final anyways. So I can just flip flop these two. And then the last meeting, so once we get through the game theory advertising, I'd highlighted a few things that I thought were fun to talk about that we could now do the last week. But maybe week 7 can be a final exam review and distribution, and then the last week can be like exploratory topics. That sounds like a better idea. Okay. All right, we'll do that. And then as you're reading the textbook on our last day, let me know if there's anything you'd like to cover that we haven't covered. And we can cover it week 8, although it won't be on the test, but just the things to talk about. Okay, well, that works. People, so you're all gonna come the last day, right? That's my concern. Okay, all right. So as long as I'm not talking to myself on October 11th. That actually works well because I think I'm going on vacation the next um what? No, in October because it's the 19th is my anniversary and we usually yeah. So I think we're out of town that next weekend anyways. So if if I
Right, 'cause
can
normally on the last week, they're either, they open it up for like presentations and stuff. And
yeah
so we don't really cover the test because we take it home and they covered it a week before. That's what I noticed in this program.
yeah
So we don't have a presentation to do, so I mean, sometimes they'll just cancel the last class too, so it all depends on you, obviously.
well I mean I want to get your money's worth. It's only that's I don't want to cheat you of an 8th meeting, but yeah, I don't have presentations because of the like breakdown of class.
Yeah.
It'd be difficult when some people are participating remotely, but yeah, we'll do that. Um, I mean, I guess I can. Would anybody be interested in presentations as part of the final or not? Okay. Yeah, okay. Just suggesting it. Well, I don't know. Some people might prefer. Okay, we'll leave it the way it is.
Instead of a written assignment, I prefer that, but I'll go with the group.
Yeah.
Instead of homework 3 or something, well, still, I mean,
We'll just leave it how it is. Because it's more of a we don't really have time to get into like a
right.
what do you call it, like case exercise situation anyways, but all right, so homework 1's done. Homework, so essentially then that means homework 2 is due week 6, homework 3 is due week 7, and the finals due week 8. And then we're done. Or we're not done, but then we have one more class, but it won't be part of the final. Okay. Sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Uh, okay. So we did these ones, for most of them. So I want to cover just a few things from chapter 9. And I don't know if I have any specific slides from chapter 10, but if you read chapter 10 or read chapter 10 and have any questions or things you want to talk about in terms of like principles of, business, chapter 10 is more of like a like a self-help book kind of situation where it's like you should do this to maximize your business. And it's not the problem is it's like some of those things are not applicable to all scenarios. But essentially chapter 10 is like realize the industry you're in, or choose which industry you want to go into based on like the characteristics of it. Like if you but the only problem with that is like it would limit some industries just based on the fact that they're not like um business concept attractive, but I get the idea that knowing the industry you want to go into and knowing how to cater your production to your competitors, if any, is a pretty good. So anyway, we're going to learn about a couple different types of industries or markets. The first is going to be perfect competition, which we kind of hinted at last time with the perfectly elastic demand curve. And then we'll talk about monopoly. And then in the next week or the next week, we're going to talk about oligopoly, which is a small number of powerful suppliers. And what was the other one? Monopolistic competition, which is the more general one, which is like lots of different producers like competing with the same market, like cereal, shoes, stuff like that, where most like clothing or food products is monopolistic competition because there's a large number of competitors. And then oligopoly is more of the big tech firms, and then we can get into some game theory. But first, we'll learn about the extremes, where perfect competition is essentially you have no market power, and then monopoly is you have the 100% of the market. So if you learn these two, I guess there's less perfect competition firms and less monopolies than the other two. But if you understand the boundary cases, it makes the other ones makes more sense. So perfect competition is a market in which firms produce a product or service with very close substitutes, or like perfect substitutes is probably how I describe it, meaning demand is very elastic. And I'd correct that saying like perfectly elastic. So firms have many rivals and no cost advantage, and the industry has no entry or exit barriers. That means any firm can come in or sell as long as they can do the business. So the caveat is that a competitive firm can earn positive or negative economic profit in the short run, but only until entry or exit occurs. And in the long run, there's essentially zero economic profit because but think of the long run and short run as varying timelines, because there's always time to earn short-term profit, which could last numbers of years, or short-term losses. And the caveat is, like, in theory, like the market will self-correct if more suppliers come to the market. Eventually that's going to even out, or if like the it's like a short-term boom like toilet paper during COVID. We knew that wasn't gonna be a situation forever. In the short run, it seemed like a lot of TP sellers made a pretty good profit, but eventually, we're not paying $20 a roll for TP. That was a short-term opportunity. So we briefly discussed this concept last time, but what was our example of a perfect competition firm? You remember? When we looked at the flat demand curve that was just horizontal. Like,
There was movie tickets, there was gas.
yeah. I think it was the farmer's market situation, right? This was price,
Perfectly elastic.
this was quantity, and then there was a demand curve that was like this.
Yeah,
All right, and the reason why this is a good a good market to learn is that, think of it like they're identical substitutes. So if this is, I think the last time I talked about the price of like farmer's market apples, say it's like $1. Okay, and if the price of farmer's market apples is $1 and they're the same thing, then anyone that tries to sell any firm that tries to sell apples at more than that, nobody would buy it because they can just buy the ones for $1. And there's not going to be a price below that because the market's been set, and that's the price that firms can make a profit. So think of it as an industry extreme case where there's perfect substitutes, and there's a long run price that's set by the market, and firms can either sell as much as they want at that price or not. Those are the
doesn't seem like a great industry to be in.
No, that's the idea. is that, you wanna have some distinctive features that set your product apart, right?
I mean, no barrier to entry seems nice. That means anybody can.
Assuming you can cover your costs, yeah. But that's the idea. Let's say that you're, a vendor at the farmer's market selling apples. And your competitor is also selling apples and you get the same thing, so, the way to like, make a profit would be like, get some different apples or like have some, say like these are heirloom apples, or something like that, or have some product that another competitor doesn't have the same exact thing. So if you can, differentiate your product, that's when you start to have some power, but in theory, most markets are not like this because very few things are like exact substitutes. But that's the concept of this market. It's like the extreme case where you have no market power. Oops, sorry. There we go. Okay, then the other extreme case, which we haven't really talked about yet, but I'm sure you know what a monopoly is that a monopoly produces a product or service with no close substitutes. Monopolies have no rivals, and barriers to entry prevent other firms from entering the industry. So there's just one seller of a good or service with no substitutes. Now, the textbook does mention that kind of the short-term aspect of monopoly, and that you want to get in, like the best case scenario is to be a monopolist, which is a bit of a disclaimer because there are monopolies that persist for a very long time, and some of them are set by like government regulations, and it's I think like the vulnerability of some monopolies that is illustrated in the textbook is a little overstated because you'll see uh, some buyers or sellers just have the rights to do something for a long time. Has nothing to, or a lot to do with their business, but just that it's difficult to overthrow a monopolist that has been like set by the government or allowed kind of thing. But so monopolies produce a good or service with no close substitutes. So what are some examples of monopolies? In the
I pick on you again,
this should be the first example
Yeah.
is
utilities.
like utilities, yeah.
Or even internet service providers.
Well, but there's a couple different, you can, well, unless you don't have an option, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah, well, maybe it's not so much of a novel. I think I have two options at home.
Yeah.
That's it.
yeah, that's an oligopoly, yeah. So, right, utilities, and it's pretty clear that, like, I don't know where everyone resides, but if you live in Laverne or somewhere in the territory, you're probably an Edison customer. And if you want to get electricity, you don't have any other options, right? They have the legal rights to sell you electricity. And if you think about it, it's probably good. Utilities are all regulated monopolies. And what that means is that they can't, they have control over price and service, but they can't just do whatever they want because there's government regulations. And there's government regulations on like the safety and other aspects like that. So if you think electricity is too expensive in California, it might be, but if you just allowed, that to be a free market, uh, there'd probably be a lot more safety issues and, it's something where like, I'm not saying that, I work at Edison, so I'm not saying electricity is not a big portion of household budgets, but it's something where you'd like to have some regulation because it's a very volatile product that needs to be, so I think having that be a monopoly is probably a good thing where you don't really want that to be a free market. And the same thing with like, the gas service. You don't want, like you probably have a service, or if you, I don't know, most people have gas unless you're an all electric household, but if you just open that up to the free market and you have some guy just showing up being like, I can give you cheaper gas, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Okay, so that sounds like something where you'd want to have a trusted firm.
Can you say that about solar as well?
Uh, no, solar wouldn't be a monopoly, right? Because what do you mean by like the solar panels or?
Somebody like you're saying like with gas, somebody else would just sell you something an option on that. Will solar and Edison, are they also a second option there?
So just to make sure we're talking about the same, so solar, so like the purchase of a solar panel would not be a monopoly because you can buy from different suppliers, right? So having a solar panel. So the supply of solar electricity is not really just unless you own the solar panel, not really a service you can like segregate. Like the closest thing you can get to this is like there's community choice aggregators, they're called, that you can purchase their solar power but Edison still delivers it because they own the infrastructure, and they would give you like let's say you want to purchase like more less fossil fuel electricity. You can kind of do that, although it's kind of I mean, not to go too deep into the electricity market, but it's unless it's like the middle of the day, uh, or sometime not in the nighttime, it's virtually impossible to buy or to supply with 100% solar or non-carbons because there's just not enough, like there's not enough storage. The sun goes down, there's not enough wind. So if you're buying electricity at 9 p.m. in California, you are getting it from some um, some fossil fuels, natural gas. It's just it's not, unless you own your own solar panel and have the battery kind of situation, then you can like do that. But if you're buying it from the market, there isn't enough battery storage and there's no solar when it's dark. So to buy solar, um, you either have to buy the solar panel yourself, buy the battery, or you can buy it from a different, what it's called, community choice aggregator, which promises you 100% clean energy, which is a bit of a fine print for you because you're buying like all the solar and wind you can, and if there's none available, you're buying like carbon offsets. So you the I don't know if I answered your question about solar, but to be a, to be a full like monopolist, you have to be able to like segregate the market, and you have to be able to have no close substitutes. So there are substitutes for solar where you can buy wind gas, you can buy natural gas, you can buy nuclear electricity. Um, and then like the whole household solar market wouldn't be a monopoly because you can buy different options. Yeah. Um, so a bit of a tangent there, but and then the other two main ones. So there's usually electricity, there's gas, there's water, right? Your water service, and then there's your trash service. So you also have a regulated water service. You probably only have one choice, which is also a pretty good thing you want to have regulated. You don't want anyone just serving you water from that's not inspected, that doesn't meet standards. Um, the trash one probably I might if you put that on the market, that might be okay. Like, but then again, you don't want someone just dumping trash everywhere. There's regulations in that too, and basically all your main utilities are government regulated monopolies, right? So any other examples of monopoly in the way we described it? Not really. I mean, the only other way you can swing this where there's not some choices is if you go to like there's like situational monopolies. Like let's say you go to a Dodger game, and you want to buy a beer. There's probably one supplier. Like you know, I don't know who the wholesaler is, but it's probably Budweiser or whoever has the contract. And if you want to buy a beer from someone other than that supplier, you can't do it, right? You can't bring your own beer in. You gotta buy from that supplier. The same thing with like the peanuts. They have one type of peanuts. If you want to buy peanuts, it's not like you can go to Vaughn's in the Dodger game and like shop around. There's only one supplier. So when it's a situation like that, uh, like there's situational monopolies, but if you give it more time, like you know, after the game, you can shop around or you can bring your own peanuts. But if you're stuck in a market with no substitutes, then that's not. Um, even like Amazon isn't a monopoly because they have some competitors, even though they're the biggest. But there's still bookstores. There's still you know, better streaming services. There's other I know the cloud web services is pretty much a dominant service, but there are some other cloud services. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on?
But AT&T in the seventies, did they break AT&T up? Like all those
Yeah,
baby bell companies,
yeah.
that was
They,
a pretty extreme case.
yeah. Right. There are situations where like the government could step in and there's like an antitrust case and determine like this is not a regulated monopoly, this is just a monopoly. And I think that happened with Microsoft as well when they
They had to stop bundling their internet browser with Windows or something like that.
yeah, and some of the like you would buy Windows or have to run a opera and you had no choice of what was compatible with it except for Windows things like that. Yeah. And so that was determined to be like a forced monopoly because you know, maybe you want to use Google Chrome or something else.
They just got let off the hook for that one, I mean, that was a different case.
Yeah, right. And I can't remember, there was another big one of these with maybe Facebook or something, but I can't remember what the whole result was or what the,
It happened with Google. They broke it apart.
yeah, that sounds correct.
So the phone line before it used to be a monopoly, right? But now that cell phones came out, they're not the monopoly that they used to be.
So sorry, what was, what was the question?
Well, back before cell phones, the phone lines were considered a monopoly, right?
Oh yeah, I see right, exactly, yeah. So the question was like, did phone service used to be a monopoly? It was, right? Because you can only buy like Pac Bell or whatever the phone service. You did, I don't think.
So now it's just like, basically like an internet service now, because we have cell phones, so people prefer cell phones over a regular phone now.
Yeah. So that wouldn't be a true monopoly because unless you're, I know you can shop around for cell phones, like you have some options, but unless like you all were saying, if your internet provider only has, if you only have one choice, then it is a monopoly. I don't know if that's the case. I know that like there's usually two or three choices. You can get like
Yeah.
Spectrum or Verizon or Cox or something. So if there's a few choices, it's not really a monopoly, it's a oligopoly, which we'll talk about. But yeah, you're right, the phone service went from being a monopoly, because you only had one, it used to be essentially a utility, and now it's more of a oligopoly. Um, sorry. Okay, so I think, oops, sorry. This is the last slide on this section. And I put this from chapter 10, I think, just because I thought it was interesting. It does look like it's a bit outdated, but they were trying to emphasize the fact that if you can get into a market with a higher expected return or return on investment, they were showing you the industries that are more, have a better return and the ones that are less competitive. I don't know if this is from 2016. This might have changed a bit. And some of these are kind of broad, like beverages. It makes sense that semiconductors are a pretty good industry because there aren't a lot of substitutes or pharmaceuticals or drug companies. I mean, that's a pretty good return there. I don't know if this is still the case. It would be a bit surprising, or not surprising, but just something to point out if airlines were if there was no profit in airlines and you're just you know, getting on these airways or these planes and they're not making a profit. Doesn't seem like the best situation, but I do know that like new car sales make a much smaller profit than you might otherwise realize because I think most of the so aside from just the sale of a vehicle, which is expensive to make, how do car companies make a lot of their money?
Financing.
Financing, and what happens if your car gets
Oh, maintenance.
maintenance? Yeah, so they make it like, just think about every time you take your car in, especially if you have an old car, like you're just like, this is like, at some point you're just like, I think I've spent more on this servicing and the maintenance than the price of the car. So, things like buying the extended warranty or something that you might want to look into. I'm not trying to give you like car buying advice, but I know the car companies, because there's so many options and they have to compete with different consumers and different products, and there's all these, one price change can make a big swing in consumers. That more of like, once you sell the vehicle and that customer has to buy those parts and get serviced at that state, especially something like can you take a Tesla anywhere other than a Tesla's? You can't just go to, right. So that's something where you have to buy Tesla parts for the Tesla. And so I'm sure it's been figured out that like the maintenance is doubling what the sale of the vehicle was, kind of thing. The same thing with like, um, I forgot what I was gonna say. There's some other car vehicle situation where like it's more of like and the add-ons too, like the add-ons you'll see are give the car manufacturers quite an advantage over just the base value.
The barriers to entry, semiconductors and pharmaceuticals are just monstrous.
Yeah, exactly. Like
We better have a better, I'm not even sure what is ROCE?
return on something invest.
Expenditure.
Yeah, it's
Oh, okay, so it is measuring that.
yeah,
Yeah, software is missing from that. That's hugely profitable.
right. And this could probably be updated a bit. I'm sure there's things like cell phones or cloud servicers or
Oh, yeah.
they're like, but petroleum telecom services, that's been replaced. Uh, I would think this one would be moved up a bit, the hospitals and healthcare services, because that's been more of a profit maximizing thing. But anyway, I don't know if this is accurate today. I actually surprised that restaurants are higher up than they are as well, but or I don't even know, what is beverages, just selling, is that like Coke or is that yeah, maybe those kind of things. Anyways, so just knowing the industry you're in. But again, I don't know how up to date this is. And like you said, like you can't just choose to get into this, like start making semiconductors, right? Like, good luck. Okay. What time is it? Okay, so I did want to mention one more thing. well, not one more thing, but one more thing, lecture wise. Got a little, we got about half an hour or so, or 45 minutes, I think. Oh, 11:50. Okay. Where's my? So under lecture slides, I posted, or I just uploaded another PowerPoint that I had previously had that I thought was applicable to this topic, which is like the short one, long one scenarios and how that can affect how that can lead to long run equilibrium and how things change. So if you look up long run equilibrium competitive firm, which I posted, I'm gonna download this. Okay. So as you can see, I actually prepared this for um, a job interview, which I did not get, but I still. So it was like I had applied for some like teaching jobs, and then COVID happened, and then uh, everything was online, and they're like, I just had like it was like a job in Sacramento, and I'm like, I don't live in Sacramento, and it was during COVID. They're like, well, it's all online, so I'm like, okay. So I interviewed and they like never heard. I think I was just like a check off, like gotta interview enough people. But anyways, they asked me to like prepare a brief presentation on long run equilibrium in a perfectly competitive market, which is what we're doing now. So I had some, this is what we just talked about. There's a large number of firms, they're homogeneous projects, they're perfect substitutes. There's a perfectly elastic demand curve. Firms are price takers. The supply demand sets the price in the long run, but in the short run, you can enter and exit and make a short-term profit or loss. And so we haven't really gotten into these aspects of labor and in capital yet, but just know that like in the short run, think of it as such that you can adjust your labor, like you can hire more workers, change your hours kind of thing. But in the short run, you can't really expand production or expand plants, as they're called. That's more of a long run thing. So because of that, you can get into the industry, increase production, decrease production, and then in the long run, in the sense, you can adjust all factors. You can build a new warehouse. You can enter an industry, make a new website. So the main difference between short run and long run is not the time, it's what you can adjust. So if you can adjust labor and make some small tweaks, that's a short run adjustment. But if you're expanding business or buying a new plant or a new warehouse or buying a bunch of computers, that's more of a long run investment. And the idea is that, in theory, there's no economic profit in a perfectly competitive firm, because if there were, then firms would come into it and get some of the profit. And if firms were taking losses, then some of the firms would leave and shut down. So I had a couple examples to illustrate this concept, both resulting in different outcomes, because in the first example, it was a short-term adjustment. And in the second example, it was a long-term, things got replaced. So in the case of avocados, I don't know if this is a good example anymore, but there was I don't remember what it was, but a brief period where avocados were like super expensive. I don't know why. I think there was a supply chain shortage or something like that, but avocados went from like $1 to like $4 all of a sudden. So in the first example, let's say there's a demand increase for avocados in the short run. All right. And what's going to happen is if there's a big increase in demand, you'll see some firms or just sellers start selling more avocados because they're like, well, people wanted more. I'm just going to sell it, like rack up the price. And there's some short run profits. But in the long run, there's going to be too many firms that come into it, and how, like, if more and more firms start selling avocados, how do they compete with each other? Lower the price, right? To say like, okay, I'll sell the avocado for $2 or so, and then all of a sudden it gets back to what it used to be. Now, if there's the second example where DVD rentals, there was a kind of a decrease in demand in the 90s and into 2000. And there were some sellers that started leaving the market. And in the long run, the price adjustment was pretty much set lower, and the demand was set lower and the quantity was set lower because that was a market where the short run adjustments eventually led to long-term adjustments. And that market never really came back because I don't even know if you can rent DVDs anymore. Right? There's maybe you can. I think maybe there's like that one last Blockbuster that's still open, but this is a market that has permanently changed. So if I looked at, we don't need to review these things, but okay, this is what I want to show you. All right, so here, focus more on the right side. We haven't got into this, the graphing all these cost curves, but if you see here, there's a supply and demand for avocados in the industry where the initial equilibrium is selling for $2, and in this scenario, there's like 1.3 million avocados sold. Now, if there's a short run increase in demand, what that does is tell consumers, or consumers are saying like, I really want avocados, I'll pay up to $4 for it. Some cases more. And so there's a big increase in the short run in terms of demand. And so what happens if there's a big increase in demand? What's going to happen to supply? Right? There's going to be more suppliers that come in, and like maybe in this case they were selling it for $2, and you were selling something else like melons, and you're like, oh, I can sell avocados for $4. I'll do that. So more sellers or more supply of avocados come into the market. Okay, and then what happens is eventually we just get into a situation where the the price is just pushed back to where it was because these new firms have to keep lowering prices until they can sell something. And all that's really changed from the original scenario is the price was about $2. In the short run, there was a profit-making opportunity for those firms to make $4 an avocado. That eventually everything evens out, and assuming the demand is still high and firms still can sell avocados, the only thing that really changes is there's more avocados in the market, but the profit-making opportunity is gone because the firms had to keep lowering avocado prices to compete with each other. And only the firms that were able to sell at higher prices for a little while made a profit. And the idea is that in the long run, there's no profit because those opportunities have already been hedged. So long way of illustrating the concept of long run versus short run, I guess. Now, one more example is DVD rentals, because this was a bit different. So let's say that, in the 90s, you can rent a DVD for $5. And let's say there were a million people, million DVD rentals on the market. And then what happened in 2000s, mid 2000s, is the demand for DVDs went way down because you had Netflix. I don't know if you remember when Netflix had like two options where you could do the DVDs in the mail, or you could do the streaming, and then eventually they're like, forget the DVDs in the mail. But the point is that paying $5 for one rental wasn't competing with Netflix, because you could buy their subscription for, I don't know what it was, $10 a month. You can get as many DVDs as you want. You could eventually buy the streaming service, and the demand for DVD rentals never really recovered because Netflix and other options took that market over. And so in the long run, what happened is that what I wanted to illustrate is in the short run, the opposite of what happened in avocados happened here, where firms started leaving demand decreased. A bunch of firms left the market because they're like, I can't sell DVD rentals at $1. There was still like Blockbuster, but all the probably independent ones went out. And then eventually like supply, went down a bit, and we level in a place where the difference between this scenario and the other is that in the long run, this price was changed from 5 to 2. If there's even a market anymore, because that decrease in demand was permanent. And therefore the decrease in supply was also permanent because there wasn't enough to supply. And we resulted in a case where in the long run, things were adjusted. And so you can get to a new equilibrium in the long run, where now we're earning no profit, but just note the difference between like a short-term scenario, which results back to the original, or a long-term scenario where this is a permanent market change. And I don't even know if you can rent DVDs anymore. Maybe you can, but
I think they have red boxes.
they still have Redbox. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, there is still Redbox, which I guess is still an option, but yeah. So long way of illustrating the concept of no long-term profits for this industry. But it doesn't mean that in the long run, things can't adjust. Some markets go out, some markets go under. Some markets just are temporary adjustments like TP and avocados. Okay. So I think that's all I want to show. Any questions on this concept?
Would bottled water industry be similar? I guess with the avocado example.
I think so, yeah.
So, I mean, go to any grocery store, try to get a bottle of water, it's a zillion options.
Yeah.
So unless, I mean, you either gotta, I guess, innovate or drop your price.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good, so that's not perfect competition, but it's pretty close to it because there's a little bit of like there's different, you can have like you can buy a different beverage, like let's say that, let's say the price of this went up to $10 and the price of a soda or like a juice was still $1, you could still buy the juice.
Yeah,
okay?
okay.
So there are substitutes, but you're right, there's so many options for water. And so you're either hoping like you get like you get like a contract with a gas station or with Costco saying like you can only sell this or the Dodger game, or you're hoping that you're something like Gatorade where your brand is big enough to just, I mean, I think the substitutes for Gatorade like Powerade stuff like aren't even close to what the market gets for Gatorade. Unless, I mean, unless you're someone who, if you're buying bottled water, only buys a certain brand like I do, only because this fits like in my, not to jump on the like Peloton example, but this fits perfectly in my bike.
Oh,
Just,
okay.
yeah, and nothing else fits.
The water used to be free, now they put it in a bottle and they sell it, so.
Yeah, it's kind of silly if you think about it like that.
Yeah, I can see the argument there, but this also has electrical lights, which is,
They didn't have that back then.
they didn't have that back then, but. Yeah, so to answer your question, that would be a monopolistic competition, which we'll talk about next week, I think, or the next week. Okay. So where am I? Here it is. Okay, so we revisited the syllabus. We're not done yet. I'm just gonna. So we have another homework assignment that I'm gonna go through in a second. That's due in a couple weeks. And then the only thing that else has changed is I'll update the syllabus such that the final exam is due the last week and you have a week to do it. Lecture slides, we went through week 4 and this one just now, so those are there for you to look at. Nothing's changed here, and I'll hopefully this video saves properly and I can upload it to the YouTube channel. But yeah. Now, last thing, homework assignments, which we can start doing now, is homework assignment number 2, which is right here. So this homework assignment will be due week 6, which is 2 weeks from today. And same with maybe it's a little bit longer than the first one, but that's because we're covering a bunch of more content, I think. And so we've got some questions on supply and demand. We've got some solve for equilibrium price and quantity. Got some elasticity questions. And then I've got some scenarios where depending on the industry, you can calculate the profit based on the different cost structures. So I'll go through at least one example for each, so you have an idea. And I don't know that we'll get to like part 5 today, but if not, we can cover it next week. So we'll either do the question in class, or I'll go through one of them so you have an example of how to do the other. Okay. So I guess we can start this now, yeah? All right. So why don't we start going through some of the homework assignments, and then we'll pick it up next week if we don't get through it today, which we probably won't. So the first one is a good summary of all the shifts and changes we did with all the demand curves. And so I'm gonna open up the Word document so I can just write the answers. Maybe I already opened it. I did. Okay. All right, so number 1, how will each of the following changes in demand and or supply affect equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity in the competitive market? That is, do price and quantity rise, fall, or remain unchanged? Or are the answers indeterminate because they depend on the magnitudes of the shifts? So basically, the answer to each of these is going to be market quantity goes up or down, market price goes up or down, or you can't determine one of those factors, right? Now, the ones like A, B, C, or so, when there's just one thing changing, should be a little bit easier to visualize. The ones where both things are shifting, you have to think about it a second, or I might have to redraw it just to confirm I understand.
Yeah, so the best way to work through these, do a graph.
It depends. Like if you can just visualize it in your head, it's probably fine. But if you visualize it wrong, then you might want. Yeah. So I think the ones that are just one thing changing are pretty self-explanatory, but I can try to draw some of the scenarios where it depends. Okay. So first couple, let's say supply decreases and demand is constant. So the answers are going to be what happens. I'm going to call equilibrium price P star. I'm going to call equilibrium quantity Q star. And we're going to determine what happens to both of those. Let me just make these different colors. So let's see. Okay. So if supply decreases and demand is constant, and that means the supply curve decreases, which means shift to the left, right? So if that's the only thing that happens, what happens to the equilibrium price? Do we know? Just think of the example where there was like the home price, the home sales, and there was a new licensing. Yeah, it goes up, right? So we know supply is gonna decrease, so they're gonna have to increase the price because now it's more costly to supply. And then if demand curve doesn't shift, what happens to quantity? Decreases. Yeah. Okay, that's it. We know that for sure. Here's so I can. Really just set up my. Okay, and then on these ones, you're welcome just to state the answer, or if you think you need to illustrate it, you can do that as well. So demand decreases and supply is constant. So if demand goes down, well, first of all, like if demand goes down, we know that this is going to decrease, right? Because there's. Okay. Now, what's going to happen to price if demand goes down? So demand is just going to go, like that. So demand decreases, supply is constant.
It goes down.
Price goes down, right? Yeah, because the only thing that happens is there's less consumers saying they won't pay at the regular price. They need to pay at lower prices, and there's less of them. So for sure, price decreases. Yeah. Okay, what about, so now you probably see that it's just the inverse of what previously happened, but supply increases and demand is constant. So if supply increases, that means price decreases, right? And that means quantity on the market increases. It should be the opposite of this one. Okay, and then similarly, if demand increases and supply, oh, now we have let me do number E for part E first. So demand increases and supply is constant. So that means the opposite of this one. If demand increases, the consumers will pay higher prices. And there's more consumers, this increases. Okay, so increase, right? Demand good. So now we've done all the easy ones. Okay. Now there's other scenarios where both curves can change for various reasons that we discussed. One scenario is demand increases and supply increases. Okay. Now, you know for sure that if you see both curves increasing, that the market quantity is going to increase, right? If there's more, you don't have to draw it. Like if you know that there's more suppliers and more people buying it, there has to be more salt, right? So we know for sure this increases. Okay, but do we know, or can we figure out what the price change will be?
Both go to the right.
They both go to the right, correct?
Price may not change.
Yeah, see, we don't know, right? And
Yeah.
the reason is because we don't know the magnitudes of the shifts. So it says, are the answers, do they rise, fall, or remain unchanged? In this case, it's indeterminate because we don't know, right? Okay. Now I'll do, where's the one where they both, let's do H because I think it's F and G are the harder ones to think about. So if demand decreases and supply decreases, we know that there's less suppliers, there's less buyers, quantity has to decrease, right? Okay. And we know, just like the other case, it depends on which shift is bigger in magnitude. So it's essentially the same thing as we just saw in D. We don't know the price change, right? Indeterminate. Okay. Now we got to figure these ones out. So supply increases and demand decreases. Okay. So the second part is a little bit easier to figure out because it should be clear it's indeterminate because they're going off opposite directions, right? So if supply is going up, shifting to the right, and demand is going to the left, it depends on where they land, right? So the result on if there's more suppliers than demand falls is not known. So the demand the quantity part would be indeterminate, right? Now, this one oops, okay, so this one, just to illustrate quickly, for those of you here, is we would have to move them both just to see. So let me just illustrate one real quick, and then that'll cover G too. But if we know that supply increases, right? Okay. And we know also that demand decreases, it goes the other way, right? But you can see, like, we're looking for, let's say that's the demand shift. Okay, in that case, the, um, the price would go down. But let's say this was the case, right? In any scenario, we don't know which of these curves is gonna be bigger, but if this goes this way and that goes that way, right? We're going either here or here. It looks like the price has to go down.
Yeah, makes sense.
So price decreases. All right, and then the same one, demand increases, supply decreases. We'll probably know that this part's indeterminate. And you could draw it or reason through it, but it's going to be the opposite of this one. If there's more demand, right? Demand's going to the right, and supply decreases. More consumers means they'll pay higher prices. Decrease in supply means they got to get higher prices to sell. So either way, there's upward pressure on the price, so price has to go up. Okay. So that is all of the scenarios. And again, you're welcome to, draw some graphs and confirm, but you should also be able to, sometimes it helps to draw the graphs, I think, especially for the double shift ones, but if you just want to, thought exercise it too, you can do that as well. Okay. Are we good on those ones? Okay. Let's look at, I guess number 2 is only 1 point, but we can still. So let's look at number 2, demand for tickets. So use the table below to answer the questions that follow. So we have a quantity demanded in thousands of tickets, and we have a price at different demands, and then we have quantity supplied in thousands, okay, which is 60,000. So this is a little bit different than our normal supply and demand because it's based on like capacity issue. So if this table reflects the supply and demand for tickets to a particular World Cup soccer game, what's the stadium capacity? So what's the stadium capacity based on this chart?
Um. 6,000.
60,000, yeah. Right? Because here's the supply. It's always 60,000, right? In any case. So that must be what the stadium can supply in ticket seats. So regardless of what demand or price is, they're not gonna start building new seats overnight. So the stadium capacity is 60,000. Now, if the preset ticket price is $45, would we expect to see a secondary market for tickets? Question mark, and then, well, let's answer that first. So if the preset ticket price is $45, so that's this case where the demand is 70 and the quantity supplied is 60. So if that were the scenario, yeah, right? Because there's more demanders than is supplied at that price. So the answer would be yes. A secondary market. Okay, and then would the price of a ticket in the secondary market be higher than the same as or lower than the price in the original market? So if this was again the ticket price from set by the stadium and at a price of 45, there's more buyers than there is stadium capacity. So if the rest, if 60,000 people were seated, there were 10,000 people still willing to buy. Would the secondary market sell at a higher price or a lower price?
Well, is that marginal revenue from 65 to 45, or is it?
No, this is just the
That's
the price of this is the price that on the demand curve that the market would be willing to pay. Like if the price was 25, there'd be 80,000 people demanding it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if the stadium price is 45, we know there's going to be a secondary market, and in the secondary market, are Ticketmaster going to sell at a higher price or a lower price? Higher, right? Because there's 10,000 people who would be willing to pay more than that, and so they'd probably sell it at 55 or something like that because those 10,000 people who didn't get it, who were willing to pay, I guess what would happen is unless 60,000 people bought the tickets right away, and that was that. But if the third party sellers or secondary sellers realize that demand was higher than price, they would probably raise the price until there was, essentially the market price looks like it's 65, right? That's when 60,000 people would want to pay $65 to sit in these seats. So if the price was only 45, there's extra people who want to pay for it, and so the price in the price in the secondary market would be higher. So higher than $45. That's what we mean. Okay, now, suppose for some other World Cup soccer game, the quantity of tickets demanded is 20,000 lower at each ticket price than shown in the table. If the ticket price remains 45, would the event be a sellout? So, in this case, we're looking at 20,000 lower at each ticket price. So that if you just think about like a second column where it's 60, 55, 50, 45, 40, 35, and 30. Put these back to it. So this is the quantity supplied in part C. It's gonna make it like different color. Here's my shortcut. Right. Okay, very good. All right, so the blue demand is the new one for part C, right? So if the ticket price remains $45, will the event be a sellout? So now we're here. Let me illustrate. So would that scenario be a sellout?
No.
No, right? Because at $45, there's not even enough people that want to pay that price. And there'd be unless something happens, 10,000 people who didn't go to the stadium. So no sellout because demand is less than supply. Yeah. So this is a pretty simple example, but it illustrates the kind of challenges of any facility or sports stadium or venue, because what you know is that pretty clear that in most cases the demand for that's set originally is not the same demand that comes around when the game occurs, because things change. Like if you're selling tickets before the season, and let's say there's like the football season just started, we don't know we don't know fully who's gonna be good and who's gonna be bad. And I know there's Rams and Charger games in December. So beginning of the season, like the fans are pretty optimistic probably, and the prices are set to a certain degree. And let's say that pick one of I believe the Rams no, well, I know let's say that let's use the Chargers because I know they beat the Chiefs last week. So let's say that right now Chargers fans are optimistic and they're like, we just beat the Chiefs. We have a game in December against the Raiders or something. Let's buy our tickets now, and like Charger fans, if there are any, start buying tickets, and there's increased demand for Charger tickets because the fans are optimistic. So what happens if between now and December, the Chargers lose like 10 games in a row? What's going to happen to the demand for this? Yeah, so the demand's going to fall, right? And so you don't know what the market's going to be at the time. You can guess, right? You can set those tickets at $50 or whatever, but the same scenario, let's say that Charger fans buy tickets now, and let's say by some circumstance that they're like undefeated in December. Let's say that they are 13-0 or something like that, and like the Eagles are coming to town. I don't know if they are, but then the prices are going to be huge. Like the prices are going to skyrocket. Right? So the more demand for the event would increase the price, but the same thing goes where like if it's like a Laker game and the tickets are set and you buy your tickets in advance, and then you're about to go to the game, and it's let's say it's like a back-to-back on a Sunday afternoon, and like Luke and LeBron like don't play, and none of the starters are playing, then the ticket prices are going down. You're like, I don't want these tickets anymore. No one, I did the people I came to see aren't playing. So the tough market to predict. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. And then, in the long run, although the supply of seats is fixed, you can see changes like the team could build a new stadium. Some teams are opting to build smaller stadiums now to, have more luxury boxes and, not get all their money on like, bleacher seats kind of thing, but anyway. Maybe this is a good time to pause before we start doing some algebra, and I lose you for the last 10 minutes. So why don't we, yeah, there's only about 10 minutes left. We can wrap it up here. So we'll resume going through the homework questions next week. You're welcome to, start solving them if you want to get a head start, although it's not required, but we'll do at least one example from solving for supply and demand. We'll go through at least one example for elasticity, and then we've got some profit scenarios, which, again, you're welcome to jump into these, but if not too familiar with the question, we can do it together next time. So we've got through, you should have number 1 and number 2 done. So you already got 4 points if you're writing down. And we'll cover the rest. We'll do the whole thing together, but I'll at least get enough examples for you to do the rest on your own. So I think that's a good place to stop. For next time, we'll continue with the homework assignment, and then I might have a few more lecture slides based on what's happening in the next chapters. But I won't add anything to this homework assignment because it's already, I think, long enough. Okay? So any other last comments or questions before we sign off for the day and you go to your other class at 1 or something, right? No?
Yeah, nature of inquiry.
Yeah. Everyone has another class at 1, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna, Lewis, Kyle, everyone on the Zoom there. Adriana, Anthony, Jare, and Xingzhao, I'm gonna sign off, but thanks for joining, and
Thank you, Professor.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's first do stop.